Welcome to the State of the Market for Law Firm Sales. My name is Jeremy Pook, and I lead Senior Attorney Match. In today's State of the Market, we're going to focus on personal injury law firm sales. A particular buzzword, really buzz acronym in the personal injury law firm sales space right now is MSOs, Management Services Organizations. And we're very excited today to introduce a lawyer who has a tremendous amount of experience in that space. Attorney Boris Ziser. Boris joins us from McDermott, Will, and Schulte in Manhattan. Welcome, Boris.
Thank you.
Boris is a
Be here.
partner at McDermott, Will, and Schulte and is the global head of structured finance, CLOs, and alternative assets. So before we begin with some questions, or really before we share some questions with you, Boris, for you to address, love to hear your background that you could please share with the audience, please.
As you said, I'm a partner at McDermott, Will, and Schulte, and I focus my practice on alternative assets. Part of that practice is the broadly defined space of litigation funding or investing in legal assets. People refer to it by different names, but it encompasses a lot of things. It's financing of law firms. It might be financing of individual cases, and it might involve commercial cases, or it might involve consumer type cases or claimants. But it's all things litigation funding or investments in what are often referred to as legal assets. And I've been practicing for over 30 years, and of that time, the broad litigation funding space has been a part of my practice for about 22 years or 23 years at this point. So it's something in which I've spent a lot of time over many years and have seen it evolve quite a bit. First did a transaction in 2003 or so.
Sure. And as we've talked about, that evolution is really in an interesting space right now, where a lot of your experience is in the mass torts space and litigation funding. Now that private equity is coming into the space, that term MSO is really a real buzz term right now. Here we are in the mid 2020s. So if you could just put a definition around it, Boris, and love to just know what is an MSO.
Talk about what is an MSO, but as importantly, we should talk about what it is not. And the acronym stands for Managed Services Organization. And that's exactly what it is. It's a service provider. It's an entity that provides various non-legal services to a law firm. By the way, I say a law firm only because we're talking about law firms. The concept of an MSO is not only available to law firms. Medical practices have had MSOs for years. Accounting firms have had MSOs available to them. It's just that now the same technology is being applied to law firms. But the reality of it is that this notion has been around a long time. And then you say, well, why has it been around a long time? Well, because service providers, doctors, accountants, lawyers, in this case, we use vendors to in the practice of law because there are a lot of non-legal functions, and lawyers provide legal advice. They go to court, they do transactions and things like that. But that's just the legal part of a practice. Then there's HR, there's healthcare, there's word processing to take something we all have to deal with. IT. There's a lot of non-legal functions that help a law firm operate that we often use third-party service providers to deal with. So an MSO is really a an entity that is then provides all of the or some of, doesn't have to be all, could be all, could be some of the non-legal functions of a law firm. What is it not? It is not a law firm. This notion of, well, private equity is buying a law firm. They're not buying a law firm. They're investing in a service provider business, non-legal, a provider of non-legal services to a law firm or law firms.
It's a great distinction, right? Because you and I met at a conference in late 2025 about ABSs, alternative business
Right.
structures. And another like big acronym that's discussed there is UPL, right? Unauthorized practice of law. So to make this distinction, I think is really important, right? As private equity and others, are getting into, let's say, single event personal injury law firms and other law firms as well. But just to focus on single event personal injury law firms, just curious for your thoughts about the benefits to certain personal injury law firms of introducing an MSO.
Sure. And by the way, you make an excellent point. You know, the distinction in alternative business structure is in fact a law firm. It's a law firm that has a license to have non-lawyers as owners. And going again, as I said, MSOs are not law firms. And yes, it's an important distinction. In terms of advantages for personal injury firms, there are several. First of all, I don't want to say all, but I'd be surprised if it wasn't all, but let's say most personal injury firms, as I said, use service, have non-legal functions. So who oversees those legal functions now? Well, it might be, of course, non-legal staff and the like, but at the end of the day, it's the partners of that law firm responsible for making sure that everything runs smoothly. And there's only so many hours in the day. There's only so much you can keep up with in that regard. So an MSO takes those non-legal functions and puts it into a business that actually only performs those non-legal functions. And so they can do those more efficient. They can take advantage rather of technological advancements that make the business more efficient. If you think about a personal injury firm, a personal injury firm isn't just working on one case at a time. They're working on many cases. It could be hundreds, it could be thousands. Take the mass tort context, it could be tens of thousands. There's a lot of administrative functions that are necessary in order to move that business forward. And not only does technology help, and if you stay on top of it as separate business would do, it also relieves the pressure on the lawyers who are there doing these cases to also have to then run the non-legal functions, and leaves them to the practice of law, while there is a vendor out there that focuses on running that business. And it becomes something other than just a cost center. It actually becomes a functioning, profitable business. So you get efficiency, you alleviate the pressure on lawyers from doing a lot more than focusing on their cases. And then another advantage or benefit, I guess maybe is the way to put it, is that it really gives lawyers an opportunity to have something that we have actually not had as a business, and which is the ability to have an investment in a growing business, a growing enterprise, create enterprise value. That's not how law firms have historically functioned. Law firms distribute profits at the end of the year, and that's it. There's no notion of building value. And here is an opportunity for lawyers who may stay at law firms for years and decades, and to actually have something that grows in value. Because one of the things I didn't mention, maybe I should have, is that the partners in the law firm are also equity owners, among the equity owners, I should say, of the MSO. So they have an ability to be invested in a growing platform.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So, all right, Boris. So that really leads to our next question, which is, as private equity firms continue entering into the single event personal injury law marketplace, what role do you foresee for MSOs?
I think the MSOs have an opportunity to really be an important part of the evolution, to go back to that word, the evolution of the business of law. Um, you have, of course, the upgrading of the administrative functions. We talked about that. Keeping up with the real cost also of providing those services. We didn't talk about that when we were talking about some of the benefits, but there's a cost to providing these services. And as a growing business, it would stay on top of the true cost of doing that. It's the notion of, as I said, providing lawyers an opportunity to be invested um, in a growing business. That's obviously a tremendous um, benefit. Um, um, the other thing is, keep in mind, we've been talking about this in the context of a law firm, but it doesn't have to be one law firm. You can have an MSO that really is an enterprise that provides all of these services to more than one law firm, a multitude of law firms. It could be a national uh, business that really adds a lot of efficiency to the process, and frankly makes the client experience oftentimes a lot better too, if they have a central place to call with non-legal um, questions and concerns and billing and all these things that are oftentimes a friction point. And I think that you know, people like to use the word disruption, right? We disrupt. It's disrupting the business. You could say, okay, MSOs are disrupting. I wouldn't say they're disrupting. I would say they're enhancing
Hmm.
the business of law. Disrupting, it tends to be as a positive, but oftentimes sounds as a negative, right?
Hmm.
But the reality of it is, um, they really enhance the ability of a lawyer to practice law. And I think that once more and more people see that, I think there will be a bigger and bigger role for MSOs.
Terrific. Thank you so much. So, the issue spotter, and I imagine many of the lawyers that are listening to this, one issue is, how do we make sure that the non-lawyer owners of an MSO are not interfering with the law firm side? Okay. So in single event personal injury, as an example, is having to invest in a particular expert in a case, right? Lawyer wants expert A, that could cost $30,000. There's an alternative for expert B at $15,000. Okay. How does that jive, Boris?
These are not handshake deals. Let's start with that, right? So there are agreements in place about MSOs, and they should clearly spell out what rights the MSO has or doesn't have. One right it does not have, should not have, is the ability to actually, as you say, interfere with the actual practice of law. The obligation of the lawyers hasn't changed, doesn't change, right? The lawyers are subject to the same disciplinary rules as they were before there was an MSO, and they have to do what's in the best interest of the client, not what's in the best interest of the MSO. And it's really the lawyer's decision, right? And the clients, with the client, obviously, as to whether to hire the $30,000 expert or the $100,000 expert. And it obviously it's not necessarily one is better than the other, depending on the case. One could be more appropriate than the other, either way. But the lawyers are subject to the same ethical obligation. So I don't actually see um, the lawyers all of a sudden being more um, capricious in risking their license, for example, in violating the Citadel rule anymore after there's an MSO than before. I don't think lawyers are in the habit of doing that regardless. And so the notion that private equity, which owns a service provider, is somehow now controlling the law firm. I just don't think that's true. And by the way, isn't good for business for the private equity firm either, because if there is such a violation, that's not good for the case. The service providers pay from revenue from the cases. If the law firm goes under, for example, there's nobody to pay the service provider. That's not going to help grow the enterprise. So I don't think the interests are misaligned, as I think some sometimes think it
Great.
would be the case.
Thank you. And also, right, we work by analogy. So you've mentioned several times about the evolution of the business of law. And you also mentioned earlier, and let's use that phrase, evolution of the business of accounting, the evolution of the business of healthcare,
Yeah.
of dentistry. Could you share with us just one analogy, in your experience about, where the MSO has really added value to that, the enterprise value, the business of accounting, the business of healthcare, the business of dentistry, as an analogy for, I think, what's really going to be telling for the future for law as well?
Sure. There are many MSOs in the healthcare industry. For example, there are MSOs that own chains of diagnostic or imaging clinics or centers. They can have the latest technology of, let's say, diagnostic tools. They do all of the back office billing. They do all of the insurance reimbursements. They add, in fact, many MSOs, they don't just have one clinic. And recall, I said earlier that a law firm MSO doesn't have to have one law firm as its client either. They can have many. And that's, in fact, what has happened, for example, with healthcare MSOs. And that has really enabled doctors to focus on the practice of medicine or administering the test, whatever it happens to be the focus of that particular uh, practice. And the world hasn't come to an end. It's not like all of a sudden doctors have started providing shoddy service to their patients. And it just also strikes me that if MSOs are okay for those who provide us